Hello and welcome to the Planetary Colonization podcast. This podcast is meant to educate all members of the community on the possibility and probability of planetary colonization. I'm your host, Aaron, and before we start, I would like to say one thing. This podcast is not going to go into detail on everything. This is just meant to be an introduction, and if you are interested in the topics, I highly encourage you to listen to this podcast first and then go do some more research on it. I would also like to apologize for this episode being late. I've had a lot to do this week and have had very little time to work on this. But hopefully things will get back on track as we go along, and let us finally begin this marvelous journey through space. So this episode, we're going to be talking about the early stages of planetary colonization. And oddly enough, the best way to learn how to colonize another planet is by colonizing Earth first. Now I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking that we've colonized everything we have, or every available resource we've had on Earth. Although you'd be wrong. First of all, we did not have a permanent colony on Antarctica, and that will be a major step in colonizing sub-zero temperatures. Of course, all of the things that we'll be looking at will be far lower in temperature than Antarctica is, but this will still be a major step. We have also not colonized the oceans, which is about 75% of Earth's surface, and that will help us if we were ever to encounter another planet with liquid water. Now let's start talking about the oceans first, because to me this is the most relevant one. As of now, we've only explored about 8% of the Earth's ocean, which is not a lot, considering that it's 75% of the Earth's surface. And if we would like to colonize Earth, we would need to continue and at least come with the possibility to colonize the oceans. Now, you may not think there's a need to colonize the oceans, and you might be right, but it will help us. And one of the ways it will help us is it will help us cope with extreme pressure. Now, the further you go in the ocean, the more pressure you will have and you will experience as you're down there. If we were to set up a colony in the oceans, we would be able to learn how to deal with immense pressure. And how would this help us on another planet? Well, let's take Titan for example. Titan has immense pressure, and the oceans will allow us to create technology where we can cope with this. Now, as of now, we do not have the technology, and the farthest we've ever gone in the ocean is barely scratching the surface of what there is to explore. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wouldn't this harm aquatic life? And you might be right about that. Like, if we were going to build a colony underwater, we would need to get a lot of these resources there and probably destroy a lot of natural habitat. But I also believe it can solve a problem. Now, the problem this can solve is it will more than likely stop humans from dumping things into the ocean. Now, why do I believe this? Because no human would like to throw junk at another human. At least I hope they wouldn't. So if we were to pollute less of the ocean, then we might be saving some aquatic life just because we are selfish enough to colonize it and try to save ourselves. Another problem with this is that how would we get food down there to our colony? Now, one thing that we would probably have to do is send regular shipments of food to the colony. Even though it is in the ocean and they can just rely solely on fish, I don't think that's what the people down there want to live on, and I don't think other humans that are still living on land would like those humans just to be living purely on fish. And of course, we would have the same problem with oxygen. Now, yes, there is some oxygen in the oceans, but it's not as much as we have here. So we would have to find a way to get a large amount of oxygen underwater and allow it to be in some sort of colony. This would be a major challenge, and I don't think we have the technology now to move immense amount of oxygen down the ocean into what we would hopefully would be a successful colony. Now, you may be thinking, well, we can be like a fish tank. That's another thing. I don't think a human would like to live in something they would probably call a fish tank, just because they would probably be made fun of. They'd be like the Florida of colonizing. Everybody would just make fun of them. Now, that's not really a problem, but then you realize that you need to get people to go there. And if it's not an incentive where you're going to be dealing with immense amount of pressure, hard food, little oxygen, then nobody's going to want to go to this colony. So that's the interesting thing about this, is that if we would like to colonize other planets, the oceans are the best place to start, and nobody wants to colonize the oceans. However, this will also more than likely shift humans towards the hydropower, which will take the need away from the fossil fuels, and hopefully Earth will no longer have the need for the fossil fuels, because if we were just to harness the energy from the ocean, then we would be able to power everything on Earth, which I would hope would be a good thing, although I don't think it would happen anytime soon. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on how this will work or how this colony will function. I would like for you to leave that in the comments if you have a suggestion about that, or if anything I got wrong. Now, we are going to continue to another portion that would be, in my opinion, a bigger help towards colonizing another planet. And this is low Earth orbit. Now, why is low Earth orbit important? Well, first of all, it stimulates space travel, because it is space. And believe it or not, we do have a colony in low Earth orbit. It's called the International Space Station. Now, you may not think it's a colony, but it is the first spacecraft with a permanent population. With this, we've already been able to see some of the effects that would impact the human body. Now, this you may not think is much, but it can lead to things such as osteoporosis, and honestly, we wouldn't know how the heart would react in space or on another planet. So this would be a great way for us to finally figure out what would our experiences be. Now, with this, we don't need a lot of technology to do this. It's basically what we have now. This technology wouldn't change much as you go further into space, because it's basically the same thing. Now, why is it the same thing? Because the main thing we would need to create is a gravitational field, which is very simple to do. All what we would need to do is rotate the spacecraft, which would cause the centripetal force to push down against you and create a gravitational field. Now, we have seen this effects on some of the rides that you might go to, like at a theme park, where it spins really fast and you feel like you can't move. It's basically the same thing, but this time on a much larger scale and in space. We would also need to adjust to the microgravity in space and probably on other planets, because most planets do not have a gravitational field as large as Earth, except for maybe your gas giants. But in terms of like Mars or Venus or Mercury, you will not have a larger gravitational field. Now, of course, we need to start getting used to this, because if we were to set up a colony on those other planets and we're not used to the microgravity at first, we might think it is fun, but once we come back to Earth, you will be in a great amount of pain. And if you're born on another planet, more than likely you could not come to Earth, because you would be so used to your planet that once you come onto Earth, you will be in a great amount of pain, and it will be more painful than anything you have ever experienced in your life. And that's why creating a colony in low Earth orbit is very important, because it will allow us to adjust. We also run into the same problem that we did with the ocean colony, in that we would have no oxygen and we would have no food. So for these, you would more than likely be using the same thing that we use now, as in shipments, where you need a new shipment of food. So basically much wouldn't change from what we have now with the International Space Station. And of course they will be relying on solar energy, which I believe the International Space Station relies purely on solar energy. I don't think there are any plans to create another colony soon. I know some other countries have their own satellites and space stations, but most of them are not manned all year round like the International Space Station. If we were to create another spacecraft in low Earth orbit, then more than likely we will be able to colonize another planet faster because we'll be able to identify some of the problems that we have. Now, I don't have anything else to add to this. Like I said earlier, I don't want to go into too much detail and confuse you. So we're going to leave the episode off here. So thank you so much for joining me today as we discuss the early stages of colonization, focusing on Earth. I greatly appreciate you staying all the way until the end. If you have any questions on the topics that we've discussed today, please add them in the comments. If I've missed anything or you have any suggestions, you may leave those in the comments as well. And maybe I will respond to them. More than likely, I will read it. And I look forward to having you back in the next episode. And don't forget to look up and stay curious.